faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world.
Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk.
Today, I'm going to interpret this book called The Death of a Princess, which is about the unknown history of Chinese law. The author is legal historian Li Zhende. In the first year of Zhongguan era of Northern Wei, that is 520 AD, a domestic violence case occurred involving one corpse and two lives. Prince consort Lu Hui beat his wife, Princess Lanling, to death, and the fetus in her womb also died. Lu Hui and the princess had been married for over 10 years. In between, because Lu Hui had an affair, they divorced but later reconciled. Recently, the princess was pregnant and resting, but she suddenly discovered that Lu Hui had reverted to his old ways and was having affairs with two married women. And they got into an argument, and it escalated. Lu Hui, in a rage, pushed the princess down and stomped on her belly, causing her to miscarry. Louis fled to avoid punishment, and soon after, the princess died. After the tragedy, the Northern Wei court tasked the chancellery to investigate, and the initial verdict came out quickly. First, Prince consort Lu Hui, the main offender, was sentenced to death for treason, to be executed immediately upon capture. Second, the two married women, as accomplices, were sentenced to death. Their brothers, also accomplices, were exiled to Dunhuang for military service. After receiving the report, Emperor Xiaoming of Northern Wei made a minor adjustment, changing the sentence for the two women from death to having their heads shaved, being whipped, and then sent to the palace to serve as slaves. The rest was approved as is. At that time, Emperor Xiaoming was only 10 years old, and everyone knew the real decree came from Regent Dowager Ling. She wanted to avenge her close friend and sister-in-law, Princess Lanling, so Louis Hui seemed doomed to die. But at this point, the Department of State Affairs stepped in. They raised comprehensive doubts about the verdict, causing widespread discussion both in the court and among the public. Therefore, Dowager Ling issued an edict in the emperor's name, upholding the original verdict and punishing the three leading officials of the Department of State Affairs. Kui Zuan, the director of the Three Excellencies, Yuan Shi, the vice director of the Right, and Yu Zhao, the minister of personnel. At this point, there was no chance of overturning the Lu Hu case. This case, like countless similar ones, lay silently in the historical records, forgotten by people. Over 1,500 years later, legal historian Li Zhende noticed this case from the dust of time. In the book, The Death of a Princess, he used Dowager Ling as the prosecution and Quizhuan as the defense, analyzing their statements and motivations, finding that things weren't so simple. It turned out that this controversy reflected a huge divergence between the prosecution and defense due to differences in ethnicity, background, culture, and customs. Well, and this holds significant value for modern people to understand how ancient people dealt with domestic violence and how the legal status of women evolved in ancient times. All right, I'll break this book down into 3 parts. The first part covers case classification, husband family-centric theory versus wife family-centric theory. The second part discusses the root of the tragedy, internal conflicts in cross-ethnic and cross-cultural marriages. The third part analyzes deeper motivations, the bureaucratic group's attempt to constrain imperial power. Okay, let's get started. First part, case classification, husband family-centric theory or wife family-centric theory. The chancellery, representing Empress Dowager Ling's will, made it clear the nature of this case was treason because Princess Lanling was a royal member and her fetus naturally counted as royalty too. Liu Hui killed a royal member! According to the law, that's treason and warrants the death penalty. But Kui Zuan, an official from the Department of State Affairs, questioned this, saying, sure, the princess was royal, but she married Lu Hui and became part of his family, so the fetus should be Lu family blood. And then, so the nature of this case is a father killing his unborn child. How should that be judged? Huizhuan cited a law. Parents who kill their kids with a knife out of anger get 5 years in prison. Beating them to death gets 4 years. If it's intentional, the penalty increases. In short, the chancellery's call of treason was wrong and the death sentence was too harsh. And, clearly, the core disagreement hinges on the identity of the princess and her fetus. The chancellery, with wife family-centric theory, says their royalty. Huizhuan and others, with husband family-centric theory, say they're Liu family. Moreover, based on husband family-centric theory, Huizhuan objected to punishing the two married women. And he pointed out that married women belong to their husbands' families, so responsibility should fall on the husbands, not brothers. Thus, different identity attributions lead to different punishments, making this crucial. But this raises a question: which side does the law actually back? Since Northern Wei laws are long lost, we can't get a direct answer. But one thing we do know: Northern Wei laws were based on Confucian ritual systems, which lean toward husband-family-centered theory. As a Confucian classic, the Book of Rites explicitly states that women must follow the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. The 3 obediences are: obey father at home, obey husband after marriage, obey son after husband's death, meaning a woman's life. After birth, she's her father's appendage. After marriage, she's her husband's appendage. After husband's death, she's her son's appendage. In short, women had no independent personality or dignity. The transition from obeying father at home to obeying husband after marriage also implies another layer of logic. And since after marriage, a woman's identity shifts from her birth family to her husband's family, her family allegiance must also shift. This is what the saying goes: marry a chicken, follow the chicken. Marry a dog, follow the dog. Accordingly, the Book of Rites made special provisions for women's mourning responsibilities. If a woman's parents died before she married, she must mourn for 3 years. But if they died after she married, she mourns for only 1 year, because she was already an outsider to her birth family.
In summary, a married woman's person, property, and even thoughts were subordinate to her husband's family.
Ban Gu, a historian of the Eastern Han Dynasty, further solidified this ritual system by proposing husband as the guiding principle for wife in the White Tiger discussions. Therefore, it can be inferred that the Northern Wei Code, centered on ritual systems, should also uphold the husband-family-centric theory in regulating marital relations. And there's even stronger evidence: the Kui clan of Bowling, Huizhuan's family, was responsible for drafting the Northern Wei Code, and they were renowned ritual law experts. Since the Eastern Han Dynasty, legal provisions and judicial knowledge exploded, making it impossible for ordinary people to master. This knowledge was mainly passed down through family generations, forming certain lineages of ritual law experts. The Bowling Kui clan was one such family. After Emperor Xiaowen of Northern Wei ascended, he promoted legal reform and inevitably relied heavily on the queen representatives. Hui Ting was rewarded by the court with 800 bolts of cloth, 800 dan of grain, and 2 oxen and 2 horses for his contributions. Hui Ting's daughter became Emperor Xiaowen's concubine, bringing the Bowling Kui clan into Northern Wei's bureaucratic core. Scholars note that from 409 to 534, 14 Kui clan members held central government posts, all high-ranking officials of 4th rank or above. Among them, Kui Ting's brother, Kui Zhen, served as Chief Justice under Emperor Xuan Wu, equivalent to head of the Supreme Court, overseeing national judicial affairs.
After Kui Zhen retired, the position went to his son Kui Xiaofen, then to Kui Xiaofen's cousin.
Huizhuan. Yes, the same Huizhuan who defended Liu Hui, renowned for his mastery of Confucianism and ritual law. He became an official in his 20s and was appointed Chief Justice in his early 30s. For major cases, he meticulously gathered evidence, cited classics, and delivered fair judgments, steadily growing his reputation. Around age 40, he became the director of the three excellencies in the Department of State Affairs, heading the department. Given Kuizhuan's family background and official career, he must have been thoroughly familiar with Northern Wei law. When defending Lu Hui, he indeed cited relevant legal precedents and Confucian classics like the Book of Rights. Coincidentally, Yu Zhao, the vice director of the right who supported Kuizhuan, came from the Guangping Yu clan, another ritual law family. Yu Zhao's father, Yu Minjin, also participated in Northern Wei's legal reforms and received imperial rewards. Another supporter, Yuan Shiyi, Minister of Personnel, was special. He belonged to Northern Wei's royal Xianbei ethnicity, but was Confucianized. The Xianbei people. Historical records show Yuan Shiyi thoroughly studied the Book of Documents and Zuo commentary, and was quite literary. As governor of Qizhou, he governed leniently and treated commoners kindly. This was clearly practicing Confucian benevolent governance. The conclusion is obvious.
These three Department of State Affairs officials spoke up for Lu Hui precisely to uphold the ritual law system.
Yuan Shui even cited an example implying Northern Wei's royal interference as the wife's birth family violated sage teachings. He said, during the spring and autumn period, the Duke of Qi's daughter married the Duke of Lu but had affairs, throwing Lu into chaos. The Duke of Qi ordered her sent back to Qi for execution to prevent future trouble. Good for Lu, right? But Confucius, compiling the Spring and Autumn Annals, mocked the Duke of Qi because even disciplining should be done by the husband's family, the Duke of Lu. Why should Qi intervene? Thus, Northern Wei law likely favored husband-family-centered theory, making Empress Dowager Ling's treason charge against Lu Hui hard to justify. Then why did Empress Dowager Ling dismiss opposition
And firmly uphold the verdict? Was it just to avenge her sister-in-law?
To understand this, we must examine the case's unique historical context. Part 2. Internal conflicts in cross-ethnic, cross-cultural marriages.
Let's unravel this mystery, starting with Lu Hui and Princess Lanling's different ethnic origins and cultural backgrounds. The princess came from Northern Wei's royal Xianbei people, who had distinct female traits. What were they? The Xianbei originated in the Greater Kingdom Mountains, living nomadically for generations. Both genders learned riding and archery young, forging resilient women who never felt inferior to men. Right? So, historical records even mention that Xianbei women, when angered, dare to kill even their fathers and brothers. This might be a bit exaggerated, but it also shows that in Xianbei society, women weren't weaker than men. The Northern Dynasty folk song Ballad of Mulan tells the story of Mulan disguising as a man to join the army for her father, a typical Xianbei trait. If it were a Han woman, the story wouldn't be believable. In marriage, the Xianbei didn't rely on parental orders or matchmakers like the Han. Instead, young people found their own partners and decided to wed. Every year in spring's last month, the Xianbei held gatherings where men and women mingled freely, drinking and having fun by the river. During this time, if young couples fell in love, they could freely choose to marry or not. In the family, Xianbei women owned their own property and managed it as they pleased. They didn't just obey their husbands blindly. Instead, both discussed and decided together. If opinions differed, the wife could handle things on her own.
In fact, in many cases, household authority was held by the wife.
Yan Jitui, author of Yan Family Instructions, observed that among the Xianbei, women often managed the household, meaning most heads were female. These women were always out in public, busy everywhere, seeking jobs for their sons or appealing for their husbands. Even for injustices, like building connections, women took the lead. Wives usually called husbands by their first names, unlike Han women who used honorifics. All of this is basically the opposite of Confucian ritual systems. As mentioned earlier, the ritual system emphasizes male superiority and female subordination. In family life, men's status was naturally higher. Plus, other wives obeying husbands was seen as natural, That's the husband-family-centered theory. Liu Hui came from Pengcheng, and the Liu plan upheld Confucian ethics. So his upbringing was filled with such teachings. So culturally, Liu Hui and Princess Lanling weren't compatible. Their union was due to imperial political needs. Originally, from Emperor Shaowen's era, Han aristocratic youths became key marriage partners for Northern Wei princesses. The royal goals were to consolidate rule through marriage and boost legitimacy with noble families' prestige. Among them, royal youths fleeing the southern dynasties were most popular. Princesses marrying them was a royal match of equal status. For example, before Eastern Jin fell, descendants of the Sima clan crossed the Yangtze to join Northern Wei. These nobles were top choices for prince consorts. I'll now tell this book in 3 parts. Part 1 discusses case classification, husband-family-centric theory versus wife-family-centric theory. Part 2 covers the root of tragedy, internal conflicts in cross-ethnic and cross-cultural marriages. Part 3 analyzes deeper motivations, the bureaucratic group's attempt to constrain imperial power. All right, let's get started. First part, case classification, husband-family-centric theory or wife-family-centric theory. The Chancellery, representing Empress Dowager Ling's will, made it clear. The nature of this case was treason because Princess Longling was a royal member, and her fetus naturally counted as royalty too.
Liu Hui killed a royal member. According to the law, that's treason and warrants the death penalty.
But Qi Zuan, an official from the Department of State Affairs, questioned this, saying, "Sure, the princess was royal, but she married Liu Hui and became part of his family, so the fetus should be Liu family blood." So, the nature of this case is a father killing his unborn child. How should that be judged? Qi Zuan cited a law. Parents who kill their kids with a knife out of anger get 5 years in prison. Beating them to death gets 4 years. If it's intentional, the penalty increases. In short, the Chancellery's call of treason was wrong, and the death sentence was too harsh. Clearly, the court disagreement hinges on the identity of the princess and her fetus. The Chancellery, with wife-family-centric theory, says they're royalty. Qi Zuan and others, with husband-family-centric theory, say they're Liu family.
Moreover, based on husband-family-centric theory, Qi Zuan objected to punishing the 2 married women.
He pointed out that married women belong to their husbands' families, so responsibility should fall on the husbands, not brothers. Thus, different identity attributions lead to different punishments, making this crucial. But this raises a question: which side does the law actually back? Since Northern Wei laws are long lost, we can't get a direct answer. But one thing we do know, Northern Wei laws were based on Confucian ritual systems which lean toward husband-family-centered theory. Notably, this isn't an isolated case. During the reign of Empress Dowager Ling's husband, Emperor Xuanwu of Northern Wei, he married his sister Princess Jinan to Liu Daoqian. Liu Daoqian came from the Fanyang Liu clan, also a Confucian scholarly family, and was known for his mastery of the Book of Rites.
But not long after the marriage, the princess died mysteriously.
It's said that Princess Jinan was open-minded and had multiple affairs, so Liu Daoqian, unable to bear it, killed her. Emperor Xuanru thought family scandals shouldn't be publicized, so he didn't investigate, and the matter was swept under the rug. After Emperor Xiaoming succeeded, Empress Dowager Ling took power and immediately ordered Liu Daoqian to be stripped of his position and banned from officialdom for life. It's clear that before and during Empress Dowager Ling's regency, problems from such political marriages had become prominent. More importantly, both victims, Princess Jinan and Princess Laomling, were Empress Dowager Ling's sisters-in-law, and they were very close in daily life. As both a woman and a close friend, she felt responsible to seek justice for them. Empress Dowager Ling also wanted to set an example to deter others through these 2 cases. Actually, there were precedents for punishing wife killers in judicial practice at the time. Decades before the Liu Hui case, during Emperor Shaowen of Northern Wei's reign,
There was a man who hated his wife's alcoholism. They argued, and in a fit of anger, he grabbed a stick and beat her to death.
Initially, the court sentenced him to death, but later his son petitioned saying he was only 15. He also had a 4-year-old sister. Now that their mother was dead, if their father died too, the siblings couldn't survive.
He begged to take the punishment in place of his father.
These words moved Emperor Shaowen, who changed the sentence from death to exile. Earlier, during the Eastern Jin Dynasty across the river, they also handled a domestic violence case where a man, in a fit of madness, beat his wife to death. Some officials thought he didn't do it intentionally and should be treated leniently, but the Eastern Jin court still executed him. However, this happened before Northern Wei's legal reforms. After Northern Wei adopted Confucian principles, the law naturally favored husband-family-centric theory in marital relations, which was very disadvantageous for protecting wives' rights. Empress Dowager Ling anticipated this, so from the start she ordered the Chancellery to handle the Liu Hui case to bypass the Department of State Affairs, which was full of Confucian bureaucrats. I guess Quizwan, experienced in politics and versed in law, how could he not see her intention? For him, convicting Liu Hui was a major issue concerning whether the ritual law system could be upheld. It couldn't be glossed over. He led the challenge to the initial verdict to defend the dignity of Northern Wei law and Confucian rituals. So the author believes that, at its core, the prosecution-defense debate represents Confucian bureaucrats upholding ritual law versus Xianbei nobles protecting women's rights. By today's mainstream values, Empress Dowager Ling's side would obviously gain more support and sympathy. However, purely legally speaking, what the Confucian bureaucrats insisted wasn't as conservative or backward as it appeared. And the Xianbei nobility's stance on this case wasn't as modern as it seemed either. Why is that? This brings us to the deeper motivations of both sides. The book's third part. The bureaucratic group sought to constrain imperial power. This can be seen from two opinions Quizwan and others presented. First opinion, under imperial dominance, the Chancellery's adultery punishment was excessively harsh, violating contemporary laws and customs. The Louis case actually had two components: killing his wife, destroying the fetus, plus adultery. The Chancellery, upholding Empress Dowager Ling's will, believed the two married women seduced Liu Hui into beating the princess. They bore inescapable responsibility and deserved death. Only imperial mercy reduced it to head shaving and palace enslavement. Ku Zuan countered that the Chancellery's logic was flawed. No evidence showed the women incited the beating. Their crime was just adultery, which under Northern Wei law meant a few years' labor. The punishment was clearly excessive. This raises curiosity. How did ancient China actually handle adultery? Modern people, influenced by dramas or literature, think ancient women faced cruel punishments like public shaming or lynching for adultery. But pre-Yuan dynasty, this was rare. Historical records show punishments were similar for both sexes from Qin Han to Wei Jin eras. For example, in Han Dynasty, adulterers, regardless of gender, had temples shaved and served 3 years' labor. Moreover, society was relatively tolerant of widows committing adultery. But during Qin Han, courts often encouraged widow remarriage. Han Confucian scholar Dong Zhongshu believed widows without sons could remarry. Emperor Wu of Han's sister, Princess Pingyang, lost 2 husbands before marrying General Wei Qing. Emperor Wu of Han's favorite minister, Sima Xiangru, also married the widow Zuo Wenjun. Northern Wei was no different. During Empress Dowager Ling's regency, Pingchang prefect Pei Xun had an affair with the widowed Princess Taiyuan. After exposure, Empress Dowager Ling issued an imperial decree ordering them to marry and settle the matter. Of course, these affairs occurred between peers. If different generations got involved, that was incest, strictly forbidden. Western Jin law stated, a man sleeping with an elder generation woman would be publicly beheaded. During Empress Dowager Ling's regency, Prince Guanyang Yuanshen was reported for adultery with his nephew Prince Chengyang Yuan Hui's consort.
Result? Yuan Shen was stripped of his princedom and exiled from the capital for incest.
In summary, during Qin Han Wei Jin periods, widow remarriage was common, and pure adultery usually got 2 to 3 years in prison, while incest punishments were far harsher. The chastity widow culture flourished in southern Song, and husbands killing adulterers wasn't legally recognized until Yuan Dynasty. Simply put, Northern Wei society was relatively tolerant of adultery. From this perspective, punishing those two married women, in Lu Hui's case, clearly exceeded mainstream values of the time. Essentially, Empress Dowager Ling hated Lu Hui and took it out on his mistresses. Thus, she abused her power for severe punishment.
Here's another detail. Empress Dowager Ling herself had an affair with whom?
Precisely Yuan Yi, head of the Chancellery and Northern Wei royalty, an open secret known throughout court.
She openly committed adultery while punishing others severely. Clear double standards.
Kui Zuan and others demanding adultery be sentenced according to law showed judicial respect. If this was a subtle reminder for imperial power to respect law, their second opinion, that the Chancellery lacked jurisdiction, directly challenged imperial authority.
Quizwan pointed out, in Northern Wei's political system, the Secretariat, Chancellery, and Department of State Affairs each had distinct roles.
Standard division. After imperial decisions, the Secretariat drafted edicts, passed to Chancellery, then to Department of State Affairs for execution. Throughout, the Chancellery mainly delivered documents, like a postman. But in Lu Hui's case, it acted as a courtroom, violating the system. Thus, Quizwan said, the Chancellery exists solely to submit memorials upward and convey decrees downward, nothing more. How could they judge cases? Quizwan also cited the case of Han Dynasty minister Bing Ji, who came from a judicial background and excelled at trials, but after becoming chancellor, completely avoided cases, reasoning that trials should be handled by judicial departments. As chancellor, he only needed to review their performance and report to the emperor, not intervene directly. And Yu Zhao, vice director of the right, also believed case adjudication didn't fall under the chancellery's purview.
In short, not in the position, don't meddle in the affairs. The Chancellery shouldn't have touched the Lu Hui case.
So which department should handle the case? The answer, the Department of State Affairs, where Quizwan and others served. Thus, the dispute seemed about jurisdiction between Chancellery and Department of State Affairs, but this was superficial. Everyone knew the Chancellery just followed orders. The real leader was Empress Dowager Ling. Dowager.
Therefore, Department of State Affairs officials were actually protesting imperial power for interfering with justice through informal channels to achieve personal goals.
Beyond this, the author speculates Quizwan and others might have had another motive. I think we know Emperor Xiaming was young, with his mother, Empress Dowager Ling, regent. Historically, this risked harem interference in governance. And Empress Dowager Ling indeed disregarded institutions, enjoying power plays. Her ordering the Chancellery to try the case hinted at this. Quizwan and others wanted restraint to ensure normal governance. But was this possible under imperial politics? The answer is no, clear when examining the three departments' origins. Since Qin Han, Chinese politics centered on imperial authority theory. Imperial power stood supreme over all organizations and individuals, but even capable emperors relied on bureaucrats to govern, who had their own stances and interests, creating constraints. Thus, emperors sometimes bypassed bureaucrats to enforce their will. Early in Eastern Han, to circumvent Western Han's chancellor-led bureaucracy, emperors began using trusted secretaries to draft edicts and handle state affairs, gradually expanding their power. They eventually became new bureaucrats, so emperors switched to using secretaries and later secretariat directors. By Northern Wei, secretariat directors also bureaucratized, so emperors turned to palace attendants and gentlemen of the palace gate under the chancellery, thus developing the three departments system. From this process, we see their birth and rise depended on imperial politics.
Emperors preferred inner court institutions over outer court bureaucracies.
So relying on three departments to constrain imperial power was futile, and reality proved it. Facing Quizhuan's objections, Empress Dowager Ling argued in her edict. Lu Hui's case involves a princess, so it's imperial family business, naturally handled by the chancellery.
Instead, Quizhuan and others were untimely meddlers who deserved punishment.
Hu Zuan was dismissed as director of three excellencies. Yu Zhao and Yuan Shui had salaries suspended. Thus, the Department of State Affairs' effort to regulate imperial power failed completely. The debate over Lu Hui's case concluded.
Finally, Lu Hui's fate, captured shortly after fleeing, sentenced to execution.
But on execution eve, imperial pardon spared him. Later, after Empress Dowager Ling lost power in a coup, Emperor Xiaoming restored Lu Hui's noble title. He then rose to general who conquers barbarians and court advisor. In 523 AD, 3 years after killing Princess Lanling, Lu Hui died ill. Perhaps heaven's will. His family faded into obscurity. Thus ends the death of a princess. The unknown history of Chinese law. That concludes our interpretation. Reading notes below. See you next time.